Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to Amsterdam, the city of Rembrandt, Spinoza, and Johann Cruyff. A city full of colorful, free-spirited people who don't want to be lectured by anyone, not even by me. The city that is described on the website of your event as the world capital of car independence. I like that phrase. And even though I'm not sure this title is entirely correct, for the duration of this conference, let's take it as our name. It's with the same pride and with great pleasure that I will tell you something about the past, present and future of mobility in our city. It's a story of creativity and perseverance, a story of changing perceptions, and a story of remarkable transformation. It starts in the middle of the 20th century, when Amsterdam was well on its way to become a car city, like most cities in industrialized Europe. Urban planners and policymakers actually predicted the end of the bicycle, squeezed in between the cars on this photograph, which they considered a bit of an old-fashioned form of transportation. No engine, not much innovation, very unmodern, so to speak. But the people of Amsterdam, like so many times before in the history of your city, did not want to be lectured. Not by urban planners, not by politicians, nor by policymakers, not by anyone. So they kept riding their bicycles. You couldn't blame them, of course. In fact, they had it right. Amsterdam had the perfect scale, especially back then, to take the bike anywhere you wanted to go in the city. But since the car was also very popular and the city was swamped with them, something had to give in. Conflict on the road was inevitable, and so was sharp rise in car accidents. In the whole city, in the whole country, by 1972, more than 3,500 people a year died in traffic, with almost 500 of them younger than 15 years old. Imagine more than one young person per day killed in traffic. Most of them were killed by a car while riding their bicycle. There's an interesting documentary from that year showing children in an overpopulated 19th century neighborhood called The Pipe, while they're looking for a place to play outside. They can't find one because everywhere they look there are cars, driving around, parked, jammed up. There's no green to be seen in miles. The children complain and the people in the neighborhood sympathize, but can't help them because you have to park somewhere, right? In the same year, a group of people, some of them parents of children that died in traffic, started the movement Stop the Kindermoord. You can see it on the sheet, which means stop killing children. The grassroots movements grew popular quite rapidly and organized big rallies, as you can see on the Museumplein in the other part of the slide. Looking back, that year, 1972, 50 years ago, was a defining year in the history of thinking about mobility in our city. It was one of those watershed moments. It led to fundamental rethinking of city design and the role of car drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians in it. Mobility and accessibility were still important, but slowly and steadily had to compete with other considerations: the need for green areas, safety, the quality of life in the city. The years right after that, the first bicycle infrastructure network in the history of our city was designed and completed. It started modestly with 3 routes, but a dense network of bicycle routes throughout the city would follow in the years after that. Separate lanes for bikes were introduced in many streets, and others, the maximum speed for all traffic was reduced to 30 kilometers per hour. Like here in the same neighborhood, the kids in the 70s couldn't find a place to stay because there were cars everywhere. It's a stunning difference, if you can see this difference with the one before. Then from the 19th onwards, we witnessed a second wave in rising bicycle use. All that time, despite the introduction of paid parking in large parts of the city, Amsterdam had also become more crowded with cars, partly because of the rise of its population and numbers of visitors. So as the city got more jammed up, more and more people started using the bicycle as the quickest and most flexible way to move around in the city, eventually making us the bicycle city we are today. Today, more than half of all trips in the central areas, more than half of all trips in the central areas are done by bicycle, and more than a third in the rest of the city. But more importantly, the number of accidents in traffic has drastically decreased, while the atmosphere in parts of the city has dramatically improved. For decades, mobility and city planning focused on accessibility. The question that was on the mind of many policymakers: how do we get as many people as possible in the least amount of time from one place to the other? Nowadays, other aspects of mobility are becoming equally or even more important. Traffic in the city has to be safe and relatively pleasant for all inhabitants and visitors. Air quality has to improve. We want less emissions, and generally we want mobility to be less dominant in the way we design our neighborhoods. For example, we want less parked cars, so there is more space to live, to walk, and to meet other people. A safe and pleasant environment for living and traveling is what we aim for. I call this ambition the carefree city. And even though we are not there yet, I hope when you walk around the city this evening or tomorrow, you will notice what a carefree city is all about. Now, bear in mind, a carefree city is not a car-free city. We still need motorized vehicles, preferably emission-free, of course, for example, for persons with disabilities or for logistics. Mobility is as important as it has always been, but we make different choices when we restructure certain areas. The streets that light up in this picture represent the streets where multiple functions of public space are combined. And because space is limited, we have to prioritize. And more than ever before, a safe living environment and good air quality is likely to be prioritized over being able to get from A to B as fast as possible. Now, when you want to be the world capital or car independence or a bicycle paradise, it poses a lot of whole area of new challenges. Parked bicycles occupy a huge amount of space. Every year we have to tow off around 100,000, imagine every year we have to tow up 100,000 wrongly parked and abandoned bicycles. We have actually bicycle traffic jams, like the ones you see here before, during rush hours, and certain streets that's difficult for pedestrians to cross because the continued flow of bikes. In the last 5 years, we roughly spent 300 million euros in maintaining our network and bicycle facilities and expanding them to build new areas. In addition, we have invested in large-scale indoor parking facilities at the train stations, so that people move with the train, move with a bike, and make the whole journey without having to use a car. And we spent another 40 to 50 million in that same period on a dedicated bike program aimed at maintenance of our bicycle paradise and tackling the challenges it poses. Fixing missing links in the network, making crossings more bicycle-friendly, improving flow and pushing back congestion, better and more bicycle parking facilities indoors and outdoors, and measures to stimulate good behavior of bicyclists towards other users of the streets. In Amsterdam, the bicycle is king, but it doesn't mean you have to rule everyone. While we are rethinking the way mobility should have its place in the city, we are constantly faced with new sorts of mobility. The fast bicycles of grocery delivery services, and all sorts of speed pedelecs and cargo bikes, some of them with the size of a small car. They all demand their spot in the public space, and they present us with new questions. Legally, they're obligated to stay on the bicycle lanes. But as you can imagine, they don't really mix in well with the ordinary bicycle traffic. One solution to a problem like this is lowering the speed of all cars on all streets in the city to a maximum of 3 kilometers per hour, so cars and bigger electric bicycles can share the roads. In some places, there's just not enough space to separate pedestrians, bicycles, and cars. Back in the days, this would automatically mean that the car would be dominant on the street, and now we think differently. In order to build a safe bike ring around the city center, we came up with dedicated bicycle streets where cars are welcome, but only as a guest, driving slowly. Like this one. We adjust to new realities as we prepare for the future. So what would the future bring us? Although we're actively trying to reduce the cars in the city, there is still a lot of people that see the right of parking their car in front of their house. And that's not really helpful. We want to continue the transformation of our city, improving safety and livability. We have to take a different approach. So let's look at the 2 new slides. This is what you know from Amsterdam, the canal area, where in the 60s it became fashionable to park your car in front of your canal house. This is how it looks today. And this is how it may look in the future. Bear in mind, it's not forbidden to drive your car here. You could use it to bring people or to bring stuff into your homes. We won't allow you to park on the canal. And this makes a whole of a difference in the area. This is a future picture, but we are going to start to do this in 1 year time in part of one of the canals. I think it's not hard to see why many people support a program to reduce the number of parking permits year by year. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1972, we drastically changed the way we think about mobility in our city. Now, 50 years later, we're taking another great leap forward. I'm very excited to see where it's going. For example, with shared mobility. Younger generations can't afford or just don't need to want to own their car. Transport over water could be a solution to supply restaurants and shops. And what will drones be doing? Will they bring the medicine to people that we're now using cars or bikes for? And even more exciting, what ways of transport are still beyond our imagination? And you in this conference are in the forefront of innovation and mobility, so we're really looking also up to you, what you will bring to our city in the future. And again, the question will be, how can we use new ways of mobility to our advantage? And most importantly, how can we keep the city accessible, safe, and pleasant for all? I can't wait that I'm hoping to hear all the ideas from you, and I hope that you will have a pleasant stay and a very inspiring conference in Amsterdam today and tomorrow.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I know you've agreed to take a few minutes of questions, and we already have some questions in the conference app. If you want to take a moment too, you can open up the conference app and ask a few more. I had neglected to mention that you've been in office since 1998 and are responsible for traffic, transportation, water, and air quality. So let me just tell you, as somebody who's the first time being in Amsterdam, you're doing a wonderful job, so thank you for all your service. One of the questions that came up partly because of that almost chaotic slide or picture that you showed on the bike parking, is how much is the unorganized bike parking a pain point for the city or for other landowners?
Yep. Bicycle parking is one of our biggest difficulties and problems. I've showed you a picture of a wonderful bike parking garage which is underground. But if we want to make people actually use it, we have to strictly regulate parking on top of the garage, because bicycle owners are just like car owners. They want to park in front of the place that they need to go to, and they don't want to use, even if it's 100 meters longer, a biking garage. So we constantly are fighting with the number of bikes in the city. We have about 900,000 to 1 million bikes. This is like saying, and we're taking out every year 100,000, which are just destroyed on the way down or go to Africa or wherever. because people abandon them. So it's a constant fight on keeping the number of bikes at a certain number, otherwise it will be swamped and overworn by bicycles.
Very interesting. Okay, so that answers some of my questions. The next question, I wonder if you're going to regret offering to answer questions, but I'll ask it anyway. So, what will it take to get RDW to relax the e-scooter requirements for the Netherlands to allow them to be part of the micromobility landscape?
Sorry.
What will it take to get RDW to relax the e-scooter requirements for the Netherlands to allow them to be part of the micromobility landscape?
It's a very technical question. I'll rephrase that for people.
Okay. Maybe translate.
Most cities in the Netherlands, including Amsterdam, are not very fond of e-scooters. And there is a big discussion going on the national level whether or not to allow e-scooters on various nations. I have to say that the City Council of Amsterdam and myself are not very fond of e-scooters as well. But there's a particular reason to this, because there is a trade-off between the e-scooter and the bicycle. And since most people are using bicycles, and you have an enormous growth in using of electric bicycles in the city, this is one of the fastest growing innovations that we see in recent years, there's also less need for e-scooters than maybe in other cities in the world.
Interesting. One of the things that we found in Los Angeles when we were piloting e-scooters is that there were some roads where, in fact, e-scooters were more used than cars. And for that matter, actually, that young people were using e-scooters. So I know it sounds like it's a slightly different situation here.
It is different. Yeah. And what you see in the younger generations, that they're all moving towards electrical bikes at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's just a steep in growth in number of electric bikes, either shared mobility, but most of them are privately owned. And this is where younger people go for in the Netherlands.
Yeah, interesting. So let's talk about that for a moment. For you, what would you say are some of the cultural differences for those living in Amsterdam to ride bikes as a mode of transportation? Is it that car ownership is extremely expensive? Are children encouraged to ride bikes? Why is it so common?
Yeah, we have a culture of learning everybody to drive a bike, and also to learn it at school, and to constantly replicate the knowledge about how to drive a bicycle and use it as a child. And then people have been using it as a child, they will use it as a student, and they will continue using it. So it's a cultural thing, but it has to be refreshed every new generation, because you have to learn it yourself and see what the liberty can bring using a bike. Because you can go everywhere, it doesn't cost you anything, it can be relatively safe in our city. So it's such a pleasant and good way to drive that people tend not to use cars in the city and use more bikes. And it's a cultural thing, but it's also something that has to be refreshed every new generation.
Yeah. How old were you when you got your first bike?
I think I was about 5 or 6.
5?
Yeah,
really? Okay.
But this is the usual age. It's not very uncommon for people. They first learn to walk, and then they learn to drive a bicycle.
Amazing. Along those same lines, why do you think the change that you described between the 70s and now has been so successful? And you talked about renewing of generations and having to recommit to that movement.
Yeah.
What has the movement changed at all, or has it been exactly the same?
No, I was saying during my speech that the people in the 60s thought that bicycles were not very innovative.
Yeah.
But we've seen a lot of innovation in bikes as well. So and particularly now, it's a very challenging and also exciting time that electric bicycle is going so fast, because it means that people are learning again in a new way that the bicycle riding can be very, very exciting. And with an electric bicycle, you can go further. Yeah. Because normally, for normal people, driving a bicycle would be refrained to 5 to 10 kilometers, because you get sweaty and it's far and you get tired. But with an electric bicycle, it's different. So longer distances can be done with an electrical bike. So you see new developments, and this makes it even more interesting.
And Deputy Mayor, have you had a chance to walk around and see all of the different vehicles out there?
I haven't yet, but I will try and do so, yeah.
And are you interested in having all of those vehicles in the streets of Amsterdam?
We'll have to look, because all of the vehicles will also be very crowded. So we also have to be very strict in what we want to have where. So,
Sure. I thought I could get you to make a commitment, but no, you're too good for that. So my final question really before we go on to the next session, is around how you envision Amsterdam mobility to be 10 years from now, and how you expect it even to evolve from the photo that you showed here.
So what we're going, there are actually three directions that we take. We'll still be cars and we still park cars, but we have less parking space. We want to have more space for green areas, for areas to play or to walk around. Secondly, we will go slower. Cars will go slower. We all want to go to 30 kilometers per hour because it makes it possible, thirdly, to mix in public space different kinds of mobility, cars, bikes, and anything in between on the same side of the street, which then offers also more space to pedestrians and other ways to use public space. So these are the three directions that we take.
Excellent. I said that was the final question, but I'll ask you one more. So Amsterdam, bike capital of the world. Yes, bike capital of the world. Is there any other city that you're trying to emulate as you think about how Amsterdam develops over the next 10 years from a mobility perspective?
Oh, we're constantly in contact with other cities. I was in contact with cities in Belgium and Denmark and Germany because they're moving farther in, for example, mobility as a service. So using of apps to change between different types of mobility and then have your personal journey in ways using different types. So there's always things that we can learn from abroad as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, please join me in giving a very big and warm thank you to the Deputy Mayor from the City of Amsterdam. Again, we're so glad to have Micromobility Europe in Amsterdam this year, so thank you very much for everything you're doing.
We're happy that you're here.
Thank you again.
Thank you.